And I've been thinking a great deal over the last few weeks of exactly what we wanted to talk about next. And we are moving into an overview of the Old Testament from a historical and metaphysical perspective. An overview. We're going to move through this relatively quickly. And certainly not at depth. I want to say that Bible metaphysics and Bible history especially is one of my favorite topics within the scope of unity. There is, some might debate whether this belongs in a metaphysics class, because pure metaphysics, what we have been talking about for almost the last year, concepts of reality, the way the universe is put together, philosophy, theology, in its pure form, is what many people would say, this is metaphysics. First principles. This is how the universe works. Why does the Bible fit into that category? And the way I get around that is that metaphysics is a broad topic. It is the universe. Metaphysics is a study of truth. And I think it's very, very important to perceive our shared mythological foundation from a perspective of truth and facts. I like to weave together history and metaphysics. Metaphysics, when we're talking about the Bible, is the study that every main character, every place, every proper noun that you can think of, people, places, anything that you can name, all proper nouns represent concepts within ourselves. They represent aspects of ourselves. The Bible is such a broad topic that no overview could possibly cover everything. I have selected this approach to the material that follows an outline I received from one of my favorite teachers, Frank Giudice, and his mentor, Dr. Robert Hunt. Both taught at Unity School for many years. When I began my Bible studies, I knew absolutely nothing about the Bible, and that "knew" should be K-N-O-W. When I say I knew absolutely nothing, I knew a few verses. I could quote one or two verses. I knew some Bible stories. Most of the stories that I knew came from a Sunday morning kids program here in the Lincoln area that one of the local broadcasters, Morty Mouse, there was a puppeteer, Mr. Dale and Morty Mouse, and they told Bible stories in children's verse. So I knew that version of these Bible stories. But I knew nothing about the structure of the Bible. If you asked me where a story was, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you. I knew, what's the Old Testament, what's the New Testament, that kind of thing. I understand that there may be people out there who know the Bible chapter and verse, who know the Bible better than I do in that sense, the chapter and verse. I do not know chapter and verse Bible. I can't quote. Somebody says, Genesis 16 verse 3, and I have no idea. I can take a wild guess because I know a little bit better than I used to, but I don't know the Bible chapter and verse. The focus of my study has been to try to get an understanding of the Bible. So this class is about context. It's about placing the Bible into history and gaining a practical insight into our lives. And that's what the metaphysical part is. Gaining practical, helpful, everyday lessons. That is what metaphysical Bible interpretation is all about. But we are also going to mix this with a historical study, because that too, if you don't understand the history, you will not understand these stories. The Bible is not a reliable historical record. The Bible is not a book of facts. It is not a history book. It uses history as the medium to tell stories. One perspective from which to view the Bible is as a story of life's experiences using metaphor and symbology. That again is a metaphysical perspective. We use the Bible's stories to tell us about our own life experiences using metaphor and symbology, or metaphysics. A book of life's experiences. The challenges that we face today are addressed by the following or failing to follow our divine guidance. The problems that you and I have, the everyday challenges that we have, can either be enhanced, we can solve our problems, or look to solutions by following our divine guidance. Again, we get divine ideas, our own true inheritance of principle by following divine guidance. And the stories and the characters of the Bible represent aspects of our own consciousness as we are led by Spirit. Our divine guidance is filtered through our human consciousness, and sometimes we misinterpret our guidance. That's just the nature of spiritual growth. We may think we're getting a great idea. Oh, God, yeah, now I've got it. I've got this great idea. I'm going to, here we go. I'm going to go. But did we get the message right? Are we interpreting our guidance correctly? Characters in the Bible are not perfect people. We want to take a look at these ancient peoples and use them as examples of perfection, and they are not. They make mistakes just as we do, and they make progress just as we do. And you can even extend this out into a macrocosm. Our human culture makes mistakes, and we make progress. The Bible is a book of literature. One of my favorite books, one of my favorite examples of the Bible as literature is the book of Job. It's a little tiny story. It's tucked in there in the middle of the Old Testament. The book of Job is what's called a theodicy, a story of the justice of God, God as the dispenser of justice. And it asks the question, why does the righteous suffer? Why do good people suffer? And by the way, I'm not going to go into Job right now, but the question is never answered. It asks the question, but ultimately the question is left up to us to answer. We have to decide, why do the righteous suffer? Why do bad things happen to good people? This is an example, one example in the Old Testament, of what is called wisdom literature. Isaiah, and especially the whole book of Isaiah, but especially what chapters 40 through 55, or what scholars like to designate second Isaiah. The whole book of Isaiah is sliced up into sections, and scholars believe they were written by several people, maybe two, maybe three people, or collections of people, maybe scribes or scholars working together, and was written over a period of time. It wasn't one person sat down and wrote this book called Isaiah, or attributed to Isaiah. It wasn't necessarily even the person of Isaiah writing. One section of it, 40 through 50, or second Isaiah, is it's extremely inspirational literature, and it is often quoted. As a matter of fact, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King quoted second Isaiah more than a few times. And it becomes more meaningful when you put it into a historical concept, when you realize why Isaiah wrote that section, what he was going through when he wrote that section. It actually takes on a greater meaning, a deeper meaning. The entire book of Psalms, which is divided up, first Psalm, second Psalm, etc., that was actually a hymnal. The Psalms mean songs, and it was the hymnal of the Second Temple. Just like, sitting on the back shelf here at Unity Lincoln, we have Wings of Song, the Unity hymnal, and that the book of Psalms was the hymnal that was used in the Second Temple, and we'll get into Second Temple history in possibly a few weeks. And the book of Psalms is probably the most read of all First Testament books. Now, I wanted, just because I think this is the first time I used that phrase. This term, Old Testament and New Testament, those sort of the old way of thinking of things. Many of the scholars that have worked on the historical approach to understanding the Bible, many of them are Jewish. Well, they don't call our Old Testament, they don't call it the Old Testament, they call it their Bible. They call it actually the Tanakh, and we may get into that in a week or so. So out of deference to our Jewish brothers and sisters, modern Christian scholarship has started thinking about this in terms of the First Testament rather than the Old Testament. When you use the term Old Testament, that's old and it's been completely replaced by the New Testament and there's no reason to study the Old Testament. But if you think of it in terms of the First Testament, or a foundation of literature, and it was a foundation of literature that Jesus read and frequently quoted. So if you want to really understand where Jesus is coming from in the Gospels, in the New Testament, in the Second Testament, you have to look at his foundational literature, his Bible. And that was one of the biggest reasons that I got into First Testament literature in the first place, was because I realized how frequently Jesus quoted it. If it was important to Jesus, maybe it should be important to me too. Proverbs are just a collection of sayings and instructions about values, about moral behavior, the meaning of human life, and righteous conduct for both religious and secular readers. It's great reading whether you have a religious point of view or not. It is an example. It's also an example of wisdom literature. And there are many helpful, practical lessons about business and ethical practices. Someone was comparing the book of Proverbs to the basic education that you might get in a business school. There are warnings about false weights and measures. If you go to a marketplace and do you trust the scale of the vendor who's selling you a weighted product. A book of history. Much of the Bible is written in the form of a historical narrative of the Hebrew people. And this is where you really have to pay attention from a highly idealized point of view. The writers of the Bible were not interested in the actual factual history. They were interested in telling you the story of a people and their interaction with God's help, with God's guidance. The Bible is not a reliable historical record. It is not a book of facts. The Bible was not written for the purpose of history. And here's what I like to say. Something happened, and then the writers interpreted what happened. And this goes on today. Someone who writes a history book today can look at the events of the Civil War and then interpret what the Civil War meant to them from a particular point of view. That has definitely happened in the past. It is still happening today. One major theme, especially by one of the writers, we're going to get into who wrote the Bible in a week or so. One major theme of one of the writers is that God is responsible for everything that happened. If something happened, then God made it happen. If something happened, then God is responsible. Period. And, right there we could stop and we could interpret that for ourselves in a unity perspective. Because in unity, we say something a little similar to that, in that our concept of God, our concept of God's presence and power within us is responsible for what happens in our life, in our world, in our experience. You have to treat the stories of the Bible, and especially the 5 early stories. We're going to get into the 5 early stories of Genesis, I promise. You have to treat it as if each of these stories began with the phrase, "Once upon a time." When I tell you a story, and I started off, "Once upon a time," you know what to expect. I'm going to tell you a story now. Now that story may have a moral point. It may have it may just simply be entertainment, but it might actually tell you something about a perspective, or something that you can think about, something that you can incorporate into your consciousness and make it a part of yourself and allow it to change the way that you perceive reality. Once upon a time. And frequently, what you have to tell yourself when you're going through these biblical stories is that you have to say, it's a story. Go along with the story. Well, that doesn't make sense. If I say, once upon a time, there was a woman who fell in with a whole bunch of dwarves who were miners, and they were digging diamonds in a mountain. And you say, well, why on earth would a woman want to become a miner with a bunch of dwarves? And just go along with the story. If you try to pick apart the details and make all the details make sense, you're missing the point. It's a story. Go along with the story. One major theme of the Bible, especially the section of Deuteronomy through 2 Kings, are also known as the D writer. We're going to get into the writers of the Bible. One major theme of the Bible was put God first. And what a great metaphysical lesson that is for us. Put God first. When we put God first in our lives, everything else falls into perspective. When the characters or when the people turned to God, things went well. And when they turned from God or turned to other gods, things went badly. That was the writer's perspective, and that is how the writer told the stories. And that turning to other gods, the D writer, also known as the Deuteronomic editor, because he was responsible for the entire section of Deuteronomy all the way through 2 Kings, the D writer was very, very concerned with something called apostasy, and that's turning toward other gods. Metaphysical lesson. When we make the almighty dollar our God, when we pursue wealth and money to the exclusion of everything else that's important, we are turning to other gods, small g. And you could call that a kind of apostasy. You could call that, we want to put God first. We want to put the highest and best that we possibly know. We want to make that what is most important in our lives. The Bible is a story of the Hebrew people and their relationship with their understanding of God. And we're going to get into the name of God in just a little bit. The special name that the Hebrew people have for God, especially by one or two of the writers, was YHWH. It's pronounced Yahweh. And at a certain point, that name, YHWH, became so wonderful, so brilliant that you were not supposed to pronounce it. No tongue has soiled the name of God. And so that's why it is frequently written, as I've written it here, with asterisks as the middle characters, YHWH. We want to treat that name with a special reverence, a special respect. And especially, friends, if you have any Jewish friends in your life, this is not a name for God that you want to bandy about lightly. You want to treat it with respect. Let's see, and we are just about out of time. Let's cover this one more slide. So we're going to put God first, but what kind of a God do you put first? Sometimes the First Testament depicts a God of love, but a God that punishes to effect growth. And you can think of this as a hands-on parent. You can think, this is in unity, we tend to think of God as a God of pure love, a God that does not punish us. I've heard it said, God does not punish us for our sins. We do a great job of that ourselves. We are punished by our mistakes, not for our mistakes. We do not, there is no external God separate and apart from us. In unity, we don't think of a God up there who would punish us, because God is a God of pure love. But we do a great job of punishing ourselves, don't we? And the First Testament depicts that kind of God, a God of love, but a God who will punish in order to effect positive growth, like a hands-on parent. In a way, the First Testament is a history of the Jewish people, but it was not written for the purpose of history. And that is, you really have to understand that. It is written in the form of a history, but it was not written for the purpose of history. It was not written for historical accuracy as its objective. That was not the point. That was not what the writers were trying for. One entire section. Okay, that's duplicated. The stories were not written at the time that the events occurred. These stories, it wasn't as if somebody was sitting down and writing it down as it happened. The stories were written down. You can think of some of these stories as being told around the campfire. And then sometime hundreds or thousands of years later, the stories were written down. There are examples of exaggeration, or what's called amplification. These are routine because the writers were trying to make a point. Numbers, any number that you find in the book, in the Bible, they are frequently exaggerated or purposely symbolic. And you think of the number of people who left Egypt in the Exodus story. It says 600,000 left Egypt during the Exodus, and of course, we can't find any archaeological evidence. We can't find any documentary evidence that actually happened. There's no documentary evidence at all that the Exodus, as is depicted in the Bible that we know, that event ever really happened. Something happened. Someone like Moses probably did exist. Something happened. And then the writers went to work and were trying to make a point. And so they came up with this huge number, 600,000. It says 600,000 men besides women and children. So if you have 600,000 men and women and children and flocks and herds, which is what it says, you got a couple of million people wandering around the desert for 40 years. And there's just no way that actually, literally, historically happened. But something happened. And the writers went to work and told the story. The writers use the medium of history, but they make the story to reflect a higher meaning. And in this way, we can look at our own history. We can take a look at our own lives. We can look back at our lives, and we can take a look at our own history, and we can see in retrospect how God was guiding me all along. Yeah, I took this turn, and it took me to a place where I didn't want to go, but God was guiding me to a new place, a better place, a kingdom of heaven, a promised land. You can look at the Bible and the context of history in much the same way that you read one of James Michener's novels. I loved the novel. I loved James Michener, but I especially loved the novel Centennial, which told the story of the American West. And do I read that James Michener novel for the purpose of history? He uses a great deal of the history of the American West. And if you know the story of the American West, you can see that history reflected in the novel of James Michener in Centennial. But James Michener was not writing the book Centennial for the purpose of history. It was written to tell a story, and there's a lot of moral values in James Michener's novels, but it wasn't written for the purpose of history. It was written for entertainment and to tell a story. And that is how we will approach this overview of the First Testament, the Old Testament, over the span of the next several weeks. And so with that then, it is time. We need to pack this up. Let us receive our offering. And if you can, share with me now this offertory blessing. Take your pocketbook, your purse, your wallet, anything that represents abundance and prosperity in your life, and share this offertory blessing with me now. Together, divine love flowing through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I am joy-filled and grateful. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And you can send your tithes and love offerings to paypal.me/UnityLincoln. That's paypal.me/UnityLincoln. You can send it, if you're already on PayPal, to office@unitylincoln.org, or you can send it the old-fashioned way to Unity Lincoln, P.O. Box 30209, Lincoln, Nebraska 68503. Or you can go to our webpage at unitylincoln.org and find a convenient donate via PayPal link. You can also support Unity Lincoln by signing up for the Amazon Smile program so that every purchase that you make on Amazon.com supports Unity Lincoln. And please remember to like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, give us that big thumbs up. We sure appreciate it when you do. Leave comments in the comments section. And dear friends, we have come to the end of another Metaphysics with Reverend Evan Coleman. I am so glad that you have joined us. Please remember to join us in just a few minutes for our Sunday morning worship service. That starts at 10:30, live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. And join us on Wednesday evenings for Unity Cafe. That is a more relaxed, interactive, spiritual service. You can join Adeline's Friends Book Club on Tuesday night. That class meets via Zoom. And I think they are just wrapping up A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson this week, and they will start.
It's a few more weeks.
It's a couple more weeks. It's a couple more weeks, and they will be starting a new book in a few weeks. And friends, I'm so grateful that you have joined us here for Metaphysics with Reverend Evan Coleman.